Welcome back, everyone. Well, you've probably heard about a birthing doula, a trained individual who supports another individual through a significant health-related experience such as childbirth.
Well, death doulas are at the opposite end of the spectrum as they prepare the terminally ill patients and their families for the inevitable, while providing a space for the patient and their family to feel as comfortable as possible during this extremely important transition process. Joining us now via Skype is Alua Arthur, attorney and CEO of Going with Grace, an organization that practices and trains people on becoming death doulas. Alua, thank you so much for joining us today. So start off by telling us what inspired you to become a death doula.
Thank you so much for having me, for starters. Let's see, about 7 years ago, I was in Cuba after a depression and a leave of absence from work practicing law. And I met a woman on a bus who had uterine cancer. And we started talking about her life, and I started asking her questions about her death. And this was the first time that she'd ever been confronted with some of these questions. And I thought it strange that since this is an experience that every human being is going to have, this is a discussion that we should be having regularly. So the idea first popped in my spirit then. But about 6 months after that point in time, my brother-in-law got sick. And about 4 months after that, he was looking at the end of his life. And so I went to New York, where he and my sister and my niece were. And I walked them through the end of his life. And through that, saw very clearly how important it was to have professional support through the end of life, aside from just the medical personnel, aside from the people that are assigned to you from your doctors, but somebody whose job it is to be knowledgeable, compassionate, kind, to answer your questions, to hold your hand, somebody whose job it was just to make sure that you were doing as best as you could through the process. And so that's how I founded Going with Grace.
So your process is for people who know they're terminally ill and know that they're coming to the end of their life then, to help them
Mostly,
through?
but we also help healthy people prepare their end of life plans. So when people are still healthy, once they come into recognition of the fact that one day they're going to die, as I say, that's a great time to start preparing for the end of life. So if you're not ill, you could still really use a death doula in supporting you.
So you mean like preparing a will and those type of things? When you say preparing for death, can you be specific?
Gladly. And preparing for will, like getting a will done, is just the very basic part. Realistically, the possessions take up the smallest amount of grief that people suffer at the end of life. It's really important to start thinking about things like who would make your decisions for you in the event that you can't. We're currently in this time of this pandemic, and so it's really useful to talk about what your end of life wishes are. Do you want to be on a ventilator? What do you think about CPR? What versions of life support are you okay with? Make sure you have an idea for your services. What do you want done with your body? Burial, cremation? Do you have any specific instructions there? How do you want your passwords, your money? What do you want done with your things? Who's going to take care of your pets? Just making sure that your affairs are as complete as possible, because there's already so much grief and sadness that happens when somebody dies. We can reduce the mess by getting our affairs in order beforehand.
You're looking at so many dynamics as far as end of life issues, and just thinking about this, what is the youngest age that you would advise someone to be, even to begin to look at these issues?
I think people should really start considering the end of their lives around the age of 18, because
Wow.
obviously young people die too. But at that point, they've lived a little bit. Granted, the prefrontal cortex is still forming, but
Hmm.
they have ideas about what life might mean for them. They have started to develop a value system. They can get clear on what matters to them, so that they can consistently look back at that document as they grow.
Hmm.
We call the advanced directives the life support and desires for who will handle your affairs for you when you can't. We call that the living will. And it's a living document. It's something that's meant to grow with you as you grow and reflect where you are in life. And so as people age, they can keep coming back to the document, but we need to start early.
So
We never know when it's happening.
how much do you charge people for this?
The end of life planning consultations are $500. It's a 3 hour long complex consultation. The document itself is written through a really complex system. I worked with a bunch of other attorneys and funeral directors and hospice workers and estate planners. I talked to probate attorneys. I talked to life insurance people, all the types of people that do end of life anything, to get all the information down in one document. So I send the document out to clients beforehand, and then we do the the consultation over the internet to make sure that they have as much of the information down as possible.
But if you're 18 and you don't have kids and you don't have a whole lot, what does it matter? Because if you die, there's nobody really that you're responsible for, that you have to leave things in order for. I mean, usually older people are concerned about that, or people who have young kids, if they die when their children are young. What would the purpose be of doing this when you're so young?
Well, we're looking at it through the lens of just having stuff. Because an 18-year-old, let's say, who dies or who's in a car accident, a major car accident, at some point is taken to the hospital and put on life support. Well, how long do we keep him alive? What are his desires for, what are his values in living? Does he really value communication? Does he want his life extended for as long as medically possible? Or would he rather just have it end than live on a machine for a month and a half? These are things that if we never talk about, we don't know. And since we never quite know what it is that might happen, it's important to start those conversations really young. It might not be absolutely necessary to get everything written down, but it's also really useful just even to begin talking about the conversation, because as we engage in the thought about planning for the end of our lives, we start to think about our current lives. We start to get really clear on what we value right now, and that can underwrite the type of life that we ultimately lead. And so planning for the end of life is really twofold. You get the practical things done, write down all your passwords, figure out your services, get clear on life support and who's going to make your decisions, and you start getting really clear that your life one day is going to end, and you begin living like it. That's a real value in planning for the end of life.
You know, this is fascinating to me, particularly because I'm also, I'm a family therapist in the mental health field. So for me, it really is a great teaching moment. Now, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest things that you have learned from being a death doula?
My gosh. Man, I could answer so many things. I'd say of the most important is the value in the moment and in honoring the individual self at any current moment. There's so many things coming at us all the time. And how do we get clear on what is most important for us at the time? How do we prioritize? A lot of people look toward the future. They think about creating a legacy. Well, legacy is a lot less about what you do, and it's a lot more about who you are. And so when we're keeping track of our value system, we're looking at who am I? What do I value? If I die tomorrow, what's most important? That allows me to stay very present and grounded in today, and it allows me to live a life that feels most authentic and real for myself. When I reach the end of my life, I want to make sure that I lived my life as best as possible, because people reach the end all the time and realize that they live for somebody else, and then there's regret, and it's harder to let go at that point. It's when we die, we have to reconcile with the choices that we have made, and living my life with my death in view keeps reminding me of that fact. My life is mine. My death is mine.
That's really interesting. And you know, your choice of name, the death doula, kind of threw me off for a bit, but I realized that you are an attorney that specializes in wills and estate planning, because I've actually gone through that process because I had a young daughter and I wanted to make sure that I left things in order for her. So, you know, we always hear about attorneys who handle wills and estates and power of attorney and those type of things. So my question to you is kind of understanding now how you go about this. You know, you term yourself as a death doula. So how did you get that name, being that, you know, what you're doing is you're an attorney who does wills and estate planning?
I'm actually not. I don't do any wills, or I don't do any estate planning at all. I don't practice law anymore. My license has gone inactive. What I'm doing is helping people prepare for the end. So I help them put together all those documents. They ask questions about what's necessary. I focus not at all on the wills or the practical stuff. That's up to the attorneys.
So they still have to go to a lawyer to get those documents done so that they're in the court system to make them valid.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
I'm doing all the other things, and that's with the healthy people. When people are getting close to the end of life, we're also helping them create the death that is most ideal for them. We're helping them get clear on what their values are for living, what they want their death to look like. We're there setting up roses around the room, lighting candles, creating rituals. We're there to help the families wash the bodies after the death, if that's what they'd like, have a home funeral. When somebody dies, we help family members wrap up the affairs of their lives. So it's a lot more than just a practical bit. That's just what the healthy people. The term death doula does come from the birth doula concept, which is, you know, doing all the supportive work. A death doula is somebody who does all the non-medical care and support of the dying person and the family through the process. It's just various aspects of it. The fact that I'm a lawyer just helps with getting the practical things in order. It's not what I do. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think for most of us, who've never even heard the concept. This gives us a whole new perspective on how we can approach this. And I think for both Laverne and myself, it was a very valuable lesson. And you know what, I think we would love for you to join us again to just share more in that conversation.
Gladly. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you
All
for
right,
coming.
thank you so much.